This video is brought to you by catbeast.com. Design your own custom snapbacks and hats.
Trades. We all love them, we all hate them. Sometimes a trade could turn an entire franchise around. It could be a good turnaround or a bad turnaround. We've seen both. How's it going, ladies and gents? My name's Andy, and in my opinion, these are the 10 greatest, most impactful NBA trades since 2000. Before we start, I want to say that I'm not going to include trades that are like LeBron joining the Miami Heat. It was technically a sign-in trade, but LeBron already made his decision to go there as a free agent. I won't be including trades that are too early to tell either, like the Kawhi and DeRozan trade. Jason Tatum for Markelle Fultz also falls into this category, but it's still too early as well. It's not looking great for Philly, but it's still too early. Also, honorable mentions to LaMarcus Aldridge to Portland, Kyrie to Boston, Jermaine O'Neal to Indiana, Kyle Lowry to Toronto, Isaiah Thomas to Boston, Damian Lillard to Portland, and Tyson Chandler to Dallas. These trades barely missed the list. Alright, let's get started with number 10, Chris Paul to the Los Angeles Clippers. Normally, a trade like this should be higher on the list. The Clippers with Chris Paul had their greatest seasons in franchise history, and nobody should take away from how great those Clippers teams were. However, this CP3 era was also marred with injuries, underachievement, and tension in the locker room. Despite having multiple seasons winning over 50 games, the team never reached the conference finals. Although they were close multiple times, they ran out of gas. This trade was also kind of a one-sided trade, which is why I didn't rank it that high. New Orleans got back Eric Gordon, who had a plethora of knee injuries and never really liked playing for the team, at one point even saying that his heart was in Phoenix, and did not want New Orleans to match their offer sheet. Which, of course, they did anyway, and Gordon had the worst seasons of his career. Kevin Love for Andrew Wiggins. This is the most recent trade on the list. Kevin Love was a top 10 player in Minnesota before getting traded to Cleveland. And while his role changed a lot playing next to LeBron, he still had the talent. But during the 4 years, nearly half of Love's field goal attempts came from the three-point line. It was a hard adjustment to make, but at the end of the day, he was crucial in helping them win the championship. Without Love, the Cavs would not win. On the other side of the trade, Andrew Wiggins has not yet lived up to expectations, but there's still time. While most would say that the Cavs won the trade, it's still kinda early. Both of them are still on the same team, so we'll see what happens in the future. Shaquille O'Neal to the Miami Heat. Similar to the Kevin Love trade, Shaq joining the Miami Heat resulted in a championship just 2 years later. Except, Shaq was a way bigger deal than Love. His trade was more famous because of the whole Shaq and Kobe feud, and the Lakers were not sure who they wanted to keep. Eventually, because Shaq was getting older, they got rid of him, and Shaq landed in Miami, and he made an immediate impact on the team, helping them win 59 games in his first season there, and finish second in MVP voting. Along with Dwayne Wade's rapid improvement, the Heat won the 2006 championship. Unfortunately, by 2007, the injuries started to pile up, and with a blink of an eye, the Heat fell off very quickly and Shaq was gone. This trade also heavily impacted the Lakers because, obviously without Shaq, it took them a while to get back and rebuild. The Brooklyn Nets and Boston Celtics trade of 2013. This was the trade where the Celtics basically robbed the Nets of a bunch of first-round picks in exchange for an aging Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Jason Terry. About 1 year later, they all left the team. With the Nets picks, the Celtics used them to draft Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, two players who are now part of their core, and they both have all-star potential. This trade was pretty much the perfect situation the Celtics could have asked for. They got rid of their aging stars and got back a couple of high picks to rebuild faster. Because of this trade, their rebuild only lasted for like 1 year. They only missed the playoffs for 1 season before getting back on track and returning back to the playoffs. Although that was also because they traded for Isaiah Thomas. Either way, this trade heavily impacted both teams. The Celtics went through a quick rebuild and became contenders once again, while the Nets, on the other hand, are still rebuilding today because they lost all their picks. It was devastating for them, but it looks like they're on the right track. Number 6, Jason Kidd for Stephon Marbury. Although this trade did not lead to a championship, it gave New Jersey the best seasons they've had since the 1970s. Jason Kidd brought hope to a franchise that was mediocre for the last 20 years. With Kidd leading the way, the Nets immediately made the finals for 2 consecutive years with a team that honestly wasn't that good outside of Kidd. Kmart and Richard Jefferson were still very young, Mutombo was very old, and Kerry Kittles was a good role player. This was the team in 2003 that made the finals. Now, I know the Eastern Conference in the early 2000s was probably the weakest conference in the history of the NBA, but still, it's impressive that Kidd was able to single-handedly carry them to the finals. In 2003, they even swept the Detroit Pistons. On the other hand, the Phoenix Suns got Marbury in return, and while he did put up some great stats, about 20 points and 8 assists, the Suns were much worse than before, going from a 50-win team with Kidd to barely making the playoffs. The impact of this trade drastically changed the fortunes of two different teams. Number 5, Kawhi Leonard to San Antonio. In one perspective, you might think, well, the Spurs were already really good before Kawhi got there anyway. How much did he really impact them? Well, the truth is, the Spurs were starting to fall off around 2010 or 2011. They were still making the playoffs, but they were not considered as legit contenders during that time. So the Kawhi trade actually pushed them back up. They became contenders again because of Kawhi. His offensive game was very raw early on, but defensively he looked amazing right when he came in. Eventually, Kawhi's entire game improved. He became an all-star, a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, Finals MVP. He developed into a complete player. Although his exit was unspectacular and controversial, he turned the team around when he was there. As for the Pacers, they got back George Hill in the trade, and he was the guy that they needed. A steady, veteran point guard who controlled the pace of the game while taking pressure off the younger guys. A huge reason why the Pacers made the conference finals a couple of times. Number 4, Pau Gasol to the Los Angeles Lakers. This is one of the few trades involving an all-star that actually benefit both teams. The Memphis Grizzlies had a good run with Pau Gasol, but it was time to move on. At the time, it seemed like a bad trade for Memphis. I mean, who the hell wants Kwame Brown and Javaris Crittenton on their team? One of them was a bust who had trouble catching the ball, and the other would commit murder in 2011. But the real gem in this trade was Marc Gasol. In the trade, the Grizzlies got back the rights to Marc, who would become a huge part of their identity in the following years. Marc developed into the most versatile center in the NBA and even won Defensive Player of the Year in 2013. He was arguably the best player on those Grizzlies teams that were dark horse contenders in the West. And of course, we all know what happened on the Lakers side of the deal. 3 straight finals appearances, 2 championships, Pau pushed them back into championship status. Number 3, Grant Hill for Ben Wallace and Chucky Atkins. This is a trade that you probably did not see coming. We all know how great Grant Hill was back in his days in Detroit, but by the end of his contract, the Pistons felt like it was time to move on. So they traded him to the Orlando Magic for Ben Wallace and Chucky Atkins. At the time, everyone believed that Orlando committed robbery, because Wallace wasn't that good and Atkins was just a backup point guard. Trading those two guys for Grant Hill, who was a superstar in his prime, it seemed like a huge steal. But as the years progressed, the exact opposite became true. Hill started to get all those injuries in Orlando while Big Ben flourished in Detroit. He developed into a 4-time All-Star, 5-time All-NBA, 6-time All-Defender, and 4-time Defensive Player of the Year. He anchored a top 3 defense in the league for multiple seasons. On top of that, he helped the Pistons reach the finals twice and win the championship in 2004. Although I could have put this trade higher on the list due to the incredible impact of Wallace, the Pistons were great because of a collective effort. Their entire team fit together perfectly and Wallace was the backbone. Number 2, James Harden to Houston. Even though Harden has not yet led Houston to the championship, I put this trade at number 2 because of longevity. Harden arrived in Houston at just 23 years old, and from the looks of it, he's probably going to stay there for his entire career. There's still plenty of time to win a title, although it is going to be difficult. The Rockets essentially traded for a superstar who'd stay with them for the rest of his career, which is amazing when you think about it. The other trades I talked about on this list include players who stayed for maybe 5 or 6 years and they weren't really contenders for a long time. However, with Harden, the Rockets will be contenders for the foreseeable future. On the other side of the trade, OKC letting him go made sense at the time, and I actually made a whole video about it before. Very few people thought Harden would go from a 6th Man of the Year to immediately become an All-Star and then an MVP candidate. In OKC, Adams and Robertson are the only players remaining from the Harden trade, but it's not a bad consolation prize. Number 1. Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett to Boston. These were actually two separate trades, but I put them together because it makes sense that way. The beginning of the modern-day super team era was because of Allen and KG joining Boston. The impact of these trades go far beyond their impact on the team itself. And, well, you know, the team was pretty good too. They instantly won the championship in their first season together. They reached the finals again in 2010, and they continued to contend until 2012. While their championship window was relatively short, it had a lasting effect on the entire league. There were super teams before, but now they became a trend, and if you want to win a title, it's almost mandatory to play with multiple All-Stars. Of course, there have been exceptions, but for the most part, you need to be on a super team to win. Anyway, that's all folks. In my opinion, those were the 10 greatest, most impactful trades of this century. Also, big shout out to catbeast.com for sponsoring this video. If you want to design your own custom snapbacks and hats, you can visit the link in the description below. Are there any other trades that got snubbed from this list? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.